Greetings. Welcome. So in the last video we did a Boost DC-DC Converter where this cap discharged and there was a conducting diode going out to this cap, and we saw that once you did that discharge in resonance, the voltage of this cap went sky high. So now we're going to do a Buck Boost converter, and that's a little bit different because you take this diode and you switch it around the other way. That's about the only difference. So I mean, some people have been telling me to get back to the stuff I was doing with the bitoroidal, the St. Heinz bitoroidal transformer. I'm going to get to that. I paradoxically got kind of depressed when I had a great deal of success with that, because it's just like, yeah, that works. It would solve everything. And, meanwhile, there's, 1,000 Ukrainians a day dying. There were like 2.5 9/11s per capita in the United States, like every day. Not to mention the Russians that are dying as well. And, and Mo and Shlomo and Joe are looking to join the party in the Middle East. And so it's like, what do you do with it? Sure, it's like free energy, but everyone's like trying to slit each other's throats. So, I don't want to share it with you. Sorry, I'll get back to that. But really, you need to understand resonance a bit in order to understand why the bitoroidal is different, and what St. Heinz showed. And then there are other approaches as well. We'll get into those, I'm sure, in future. Now, before we even go to the Buck Boost, and I've been debating for time constraint wise whether to do this, but I mean, this was something I came up with on my own, and I was basically just like throwing diodes around and said, my gosh, that's weird. And so I'll show you this first, and I was very high on it for a while, and then I'll show you why it's both quite, on one level, quite astonishing, and on another level, not very interesting. So just to talk about this testbed circuit, one more time. I've been doing this for like 4 videos, so I've talked about it a lot. But you just have 3 switches, and there's not much to it. This one switch is what connects the positive leg to there. So when that switch goes, this charges up from your bus lines. The negative is already connected. This switch either discharges this cap to itself or discharges it to another cap. So in the last video, we were discharging this cap to itself with the conducting diode going out here and a coil, and that was the boost circuit. In the video before that, we were just showing that if you take one cap and discharge it into another through a coil and a conducting diode, you get the same transformation of voltage, but then you're just kind of stuck there because, the cap discharged, and, what do you do next? So in a moment, we'll look at the Buck Boost, but is there an analogy to what we did 2 videos ago where you're just discharging one cap into another and you're getting the voltage higher? And there is. And as I said, I was just basically like throwing diodes around years ago. I saw this and I was like, oh my goodness gravy. And then I realized it's not that incredible. But if you take a diode such as this and you put it on the positive leg of the capacitor that you just charged, and if you note, it's not focusing, but that's showing that it's in a blocking configuration. And now you connect this to the other leg of the diode, like that. Then you see something really interesting when you discharge this cap through a coil into a larger cap. And we'll demonstrate that in a moment. But I mean, your first thought would be, you got manure for brains. The cap already does with the, with the insulation, it already separates the charge, and you're putting another separation in, and it's going to leak across the diode. But you have to remember the thing's oscillating back and forth as an LC type circuit. And so when you do that, you see something really interesting. I'll demonstrate that for you now. So the first thing we're going to do is charge this cap to 10 volts. We're going to just leave the diode out, charge it through there, turn the switch on, positive goes to there, goes to here, round, 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 big coil, and out to here, and we'll see what shows up as voltage in this cap. And then we'll connect this diode to there, and we'll do the exact same thing. So here is the code, and we're just ignore the for loop because we're just going through once. We'll use that when we want to actually make this thing as a DC-DC Buck Boost transformer. Right now it's just going through once, so it's doing nothing. So pin 5 goes high. When that goes high, we charge the cap. So I mean, you would need like 10-20 microseconds to charge it, if that. We'll charge it for 2 seconds, and then we just shut it down, and then we discharge it, and we're going to discharge it for 2 seconds, and we're going to see what shows up in the other cap, and then we'll discharge the other cap. That's all we're doing, just charging the cap, discharging it, and see what shows up in the other cap. So first we'll do it without this diode connected between the positive and negative leg of the cap that we're charging. And then we'll connect it, and we're going to look at what happens with both caps when we do that. Alright, if this little fucker will hold together, all I'm doing is charging this cap to 10 volts and then discharging it through this coil into this cap. So we'll charge it for 10 volts, discharge it for 2 seconds, and see what shows up here, and then short this cap for 2 seconds. So let's see what happens. Let's get together and have some fun. I don't know how to do it, but it's gotta be done. So here we have the red meter on this cap. We've got the blue meter on this cap, where it says 10.2, but it's about 10 volts. Well, 10.08. What is it at? Charges up to 10.04. I'll try and take it down just a little. 10.04 volts, and then discharges. And what do we see showing up in this cap? We see 0.101 volts. So this is all very normal. This is charging up to 10 volts, 10.03, and this one is ending at 0.1 volts. And this cap is 1/100th the capacitance of this cap. So if this is at 10 volts and they both discharge and equalize, they should be at about 0.99 volts or whatever, but there's 5% variance in the cap. So this going from 10.03 to 0.101, I mean, that's just about exactly right, and that is in concordance with conservation of charge. Good old Ben Franklin. So now we'll make it weird. So now the only change that I've made between discharging this cap through a coil to this other cap is I put a blocking diode. It's blocking the positive to the negative. It seems kind of stupid because the positive and negative are already separated in a capacitor, but I put that blocking diode in there. And you recall before we went from 10 volts here to them both equalizing at 0.1, and because this is 100 times bigger, that's about right. So what do we see now? Wait for it. 10.03, 0.35. And they're both equalizing to the same thing. 0.3, I mean, this is a cheap meter, the blue one, but they're essentially equalizing to the same thing. So before we went from this going 10 volts and then both equalizing to 0.1 to putting that one diode in, and now they're both equalizing to 0.357 volts. Isn't that odd? So this is something, you know, anyone can do, and you don't even need like the Arduino and the breadboard. You can just take a cap and discharge it through a coil and then put a diode across there, discharge it again, and see that the two caps end up at different voltages, and that it's a much higher voltage when you have this cap in. It's close to about 3.6 times higher, 3.6 times higher. So when I first, you know, again, I'm self-taught and I was just throwing diodes around, and so, you know, I saw this, and so when I first saw this, I, you know, was thinking for a while, you know, I found the final secret. But then it occurred to me gradually over time, you know, fairly rapidly, but gradually over time, that the exact same thing happens anytime you transform voltage downwards with you know, a buck boost, a boost circuit electromagnetically, instead of just discharging one cap into the other. And so it's like, oh, you know, that's not so interesting, it's just normal. So in other words, this, with this backwards diode, right now it's just shooting back to here. We'll set it up as a buck boost. This is the concept of the buck boost. We'll set it up as a buck boost, and you would see the exact same thing. I'm sorry for the paint on my fingers. I'm painting my place. You would see the exact same thing. So it's like, oh, you know, it's entirely normal. But there are a couple ways where it becomes a little less normal, and one way where it becomes like, you know, what the fuck is going on? So the first thing is that, unlike a buck boost where you're discharging it, this is an entirely closed circuit. You're just taking this and discharging it into here, and in one event you have 0.1 volts show up, in the other event you have 0.356 volts show up, a 3.5 fold difference. And because this is entirely closed, you have to say that the efficiency, now this gets, I'm not going to go into all of this. If you took this and discharged it repeatedly, and in order to get this back to 10 volts, you would do so with approximately, it depends on the Q factor, approximately about 40% less charge than if you did not have this diode in place. So in other words, I mean, is that free energy? I don't know. But, you know, if you had, say, a flash bulb circuit in a camera, and, you know, it flashes, the capacitor goes to 0, and you need to recharge it. If you just recharge it from the battery, that would be one thing. If you recharged it with this setup, you would use approximately 40% less charge. In a sense, perhaps, you know, free energy, or just less wasted energy, because that happens every time you electromagnetically transform voltage, as opposed to going from a higher voltage to a lower voltage just by discharging the cap into the other. So it's sort of like, you know, yes, you know, in the first instance, when we didn't have this here, conservation of charge was obeyed. When we put this diode in, conservation of charge was violated 3.5 times to the upside. But that happens with every single time that you have an electromagnetic transformation of voltage, whether it be a conventional transformer or a switch mode DC-DC converter. That's what happens. So it's like everything's back to normal, go back to sleep. But I'll say it a second time. I'm self-taught, and so I get I have questions. One of the things I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a smallest unit of charge, the electron, and the electron has mass. And I can't think of any way to say, well, it was on this side, it was on that side, it was on. In one case, you had a specific amount of electrons charge, and in the second case, when this was put in there, you had 3.5 times as much charge. I mean, that's by definition. Charge in a capacitor is capacitance times voltage, and the voltage was 3.5 times higher in this closed system when we put this here. Therefore, there was 3.5 times as much charge, and apparently charge is associated with mass. An electron has mass. Where did that mass come from? So it then becomes astonishingly weird again. I'm just saying that the conventional paradigms and models that we have are not, they're not real great, because you have 3.5 times more charge when you have this diode here, and charge per the conventional models has associated mass. So I don't know what to make of that. It's goofy. It's goofy, I tell you. So we've had some fun. So I meant to get to the actual Buck Boost circuit, wander the paths of the misty mountains. But time has caught up with me, my boy. That was horrible. So we'll get around to the Buck Boost, and I'm trying to get back to the bitoroidal and show that circuit. And pretty much anyone can have 50, 100 watts for like $50 a parts. But we'll get to that. So what you want to look to understand is what is going on in terms of the inductance in a coil when a cap discharges, and what is going on with resonance. And what we just demonstrated here was an interesting thing that goes on in terms of not resonance, but just what's going on with the discharge of the coil. Thanks so much for your time, and stay healthy, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye.